Rachel asked me to give a talk on spotted lanternflies. So this is our newest rock star in Maryland. And I'm just going to go through sort of the update, the biology, let you know what we're doing about it, let you know what other states are doing about it, where you can find it, all that kind of good stuff. So the history, how did it get here? So in September of 2014, the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture received a report from an educator about this unusual pest. And they sent it in, and they determined it to be spotted lanternfly. And it was damaging tree of heaven, which isn't really a bad thing because that's an invasive too. So, you know, we've got one positive thing out of this. So this is its native range. Does this have a laser? So its native range is China, Bangladesh, Vietnam. You can see those latitude lines. We fit in perfectly for it, for the climate. It just seems to love it here. South Korea had it come in, and we'll talk about that, and it's considered an invasive pest in South Korea. Impacts grapes, peaches. We're going to go through kind of a list. We won't hit them all. It impacts a lot of things. It has lots of hosts. So when it showed up in South Korea, just to give you an idea, it came in, infested it in 3 years with 3 introductions. So you can see the landmass, 38,622 square miles. It is smaller than the size of Pennsylvania, which is where it originally showed up in the US. Pennsylvania has had 1 introduction, and they've been able to keep it to about 13 counties over about 4 years. So that is pretty good. South Korea, it's throughout the entire country, it's taken over.
Do you think that's because of the climate there?
I think they probably didn't know what they were up against, and they just didn't hit it as hard as Pennsylvania did when they found it. That's probably what happened. So what we know about spotted lanternfly is that it has 1 generation per year. And we've sort of put the dates in. Right now, you would see egg masses, and those are really hard to see. They're kind of grayish. They look like a spat of mud. They'll lay their eggs on anything. They are not particular. So in the spring, we'll have our first hatch out in May-ish. If it gets really warm, it could be late April. There are these black and white little, there we go. I just saw it, there it is. Doesn't really show up. The little black and white, they're small. I know in Pennsylvania, I talked to their program. They say they start to get a lot of calls about ticks that move very quickly. Those are generally first instar spotted lanternfly. So you go through 3 instars, the black and white. The 4th instar, they get this reddish color. So that's July to September. You start getting adults August, September, October. And the adults will be around until you get your first really hard freeze. So sometimes you're seeing adults through December, just depending on the weather. You don't know. So that's how their generation is. And right now 1. If it were to move south, possibly 2, but we don't know. Right now we know there's 1 generation in Pennsylvania. So their egg masses, they contain about 30 to 50 eggs. They're laid on all kinds of things. They're really well hidden. They're pretty hard to find unless you've got just huge populations, and then the egg masses are everywhere. When you see them, we always tell people to scrape them off. Lots of times in Pennsylvania, they have this whole program of people in the infested area. They go out, they just scrape egg masses. They pick different days, and they go out, they throw them in some alcohol, and just destroy egg masses. So all life stages are known to hitchhike, but the adults and the egg masses are going to be the ones that cause the greatest risk for movement. So I don't know if you can, so there's egg masses on play toys. That's a child's ladder, like sliding board. There's a bench, a picnic table. They're going into vehicles. I know in Pennsylvania when they go out during the adult season, you have to be really careful when you get in your car. You've got to inspect your car, you've got to inspect your clothes, because if you're moving to a site that's outside of that quarantine, you don't want to carry any of those adults. So they'll get in anything. They are not particular.
And they don't bite, right?
They don't bite. Nope, they don't bite. One of the very interesting things, and they're doing research on this, is that the immature, so this is either the first, second, or third instar because they're black and white, they move up and down the tree that they're feeding on, and they do that daily. So in the morning they move up, in the evening they move down. They don't know why they do that. And so in highly, highly infested areas, this is what they use. They use these tree bands, and we're using them too. So in Pennsylvania, you could see that tree band is covered in one of those 1 to 3 instars, just covered. They're just picking them up as they move up the tree, generally speaking.
Are those bands tight?
They are fairly tight, yes. We staple them around.
Are they sticky?
They're very sticky. Yeah, they're sticky on the outside. Yeah. They're having a little issue with getting pollinators, birds, small like rodents, squirrels attached. So USDA is working on a different type of sticky band, and the sticky would be on the inside. And so we may go to that this year. So here they're saying they make use of over 70 different hosts. Tree of Heaven, they strongly prefer it. It is believed that they have to feed on Tree of Heaven to reproduce. If they don't feed on Tree of Heaven, they won't reproduce. They're doing research on maybe walnuts to see if that's the case. But certainly out in the wild, they need Tree of Heaven to reproduce. And that's just a map to show you Tree of Heaven. The states that aren't colored blue probably have Tree of Heaven, they just haven't reported it. It's kind of everywhere. So here's just a little information on Tree of Heaven, the tree scars. They can get huge. I mean, I think the state record is in Annapolis, and this tree is like over 100 years old for a Tree of Heaven in someone's backyard. So that's a collector's tree. So here's a list of some of the plants affected by spotted lanternfly, not all. And as you can see, it just goes through the gamut. I mean, you name it, they pretty much have at least tried to feed on it. They have seen them in soybean, corn, alfalfa, but they have never seen them feeding. So likely what they're doing is they're not great flyers, so they sort of take off and launch. They'll go through the wind, and then they'll stop. And wherever they land is where they land. So that's probably what was happening. They were just landing in soybeans or alfalfa and hay, but they never seen them actually feeding on it. So, but they feed on our stone fruits, so our peaches, any of that, grapes. And keep in mind, they aren't fruit. They don't feed on the fruit. They feed on the vine or the tree itself. They pierce the bark, the tree, and they suck the sap out of the tree. So they're not eating the fruit. If you're seeing them, they're not eating the fruit. All kinds, cherries, grapes, hickory, hops is a big one. Now, we don't have a lot of hops growers, but we have some. And in Pennsylvania, they have some. And so that is going to affect the craft brewery. I mean, they're affecting the wineries in Pennsylvania. They have had some grape loss, some vine loss in Pennsylvania. One year they had a huge population in a vineyard. It didn't kill the vines at the time, but the next year the vines didn't come back. So they just sort of sucked all the juice out of the vines, and they weren't able to recoup over the winter. So they have had some losses, not huge losses, but they're seeing some. So here's some pictures. We got cucumber, basil, blueberry. They're not discriminate. They will feed on lots of things.
What instar do they feed throughout all the instars?
All the instars. So in Pennsylvania, one of the really big things that they're seeing, it's more of a public nuisance thing. So they cluster in these huge clusters. I think that is a cherry. And they have that honeydew, so they excrete that right out. It's sticky. Mold grows on it. I'll show you some more. Oh, this is a video. Will that work, Rachel? So this is a video. Let's see if this works. Of some. You'll see. Look towards the middle, and look for the honeydew. So here they are feeding on the vines. They're not feeding on the grapes. And see right here? So that's the mess. And that's just constant as they're feeding. So this is a picture of someone's back step. So the top two steps covered in honeydew, black mold. The bottom step, they just did a power wash. People can't go on their decks. Kids can't play outside. I mean, it's just that messy. It doesn't hurt you. It's just yucky. You know, people don't want to deal with it. It's gross. And so this is in those really high population areas in Pennsylvania.
What part of Pennsylvania?
I'm going to show you a map. It's in the southeast corner. So there are some predators, but these are just basic predators that would prey on any insect. I mean, they're not specific to spotted lanternfly. They're just, if they catch a spotted lanternfly, they'll feed on it. It's not, they are looking at some parasitic wasps, and USDA is looking into some biocontrol, but that takes years. That has to go through the labs. It has to make sure that if they were to release it out, it's not going to affect any of our native species. So I wouldn't expect any type of release of biocontrol if they find anything, probably for 4 to 5 years. So what's at risk? I mean, there's all kinds of things at risk, but here's some values for Maryland products. So you got forest products, $270 million. And the issue with forest products is mainly exporting. So if you want to export those trees to Europe, but if you were to have egg masses on those trees, they're not going to be allowed to go. So that's a lot more work for the forest products. They've got to do more inspections. They may have to take off the bark. You know, it just depends on what the international trade demands, depending on what they say. Grapes, 24 million in the state of Maryland. That's what we grow worth. Apples, we do $10 million worth of apples, 3 million in peaches. The nursery and landscape industry, 204 million, and that really comes in with if we were to issue a quarantine, they're going to have to treat more, because if they want their product to leave, they're going to have to treat for it and kill those spotted lanternfly. So some of the things that are pretty hard to put a value on, your property values. Just, are people going to want to move into an area that's infested with spotted lanternfly, with honeydew that falls all over your back deck, and it just is a mess. Tourism, ecosystems, new business initiatives, and we put that down for like the Port of Baltimore, having to deal with it. And that's just our state. So Pennsylvania's numbers are 10 times probably what our numbers are.
Is this a problem in Europe?
It is not.
It is not.
No, not yet.
Not yet.
So what has MDA been doing with it? So last year we did a survey. At the beginning of the spring when we set up our survey, we did not have spotted lanternfly. We know that it's in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Virginia. We didn't have it. So we set up 15 sites. We chose Tree of Heaven mainly on state lands. We sort of chose the northeast corner of the state because we knew that's where we bordered Pennsylvania, and if they were coming, likely coming from there. We also did Washington County because it is in Winchester, Virginia, and Frederick County, Virginia. So that's sort of where we border them. We collected a total of 69 sticky bands over the course of the survey. So we have a contractual, and this was what he would do for us every 2 weeks. He goes out, he takes those sticky bands down, and he replaces them. So we got a total of 69. We found one positive site with one adult in Cecil County, really up in that northeast corner. I mean, you can almost see the Pennsylvania line from where that site was. We put that data into a USDA mapping program. So we are 100% fully funded by USDA for this program. So we work with them. They sort of tell us how to work the surveys, what to do, what to look for. We work with them, we let them know when we find them, and then we'll go back and do more survey work. And we use iPads for that work. So when we're out there, that data goes in automatically. So here's a picture of one of our sites. There's the sticky band. And we put like a card on it. And we say, you know, call this number if you have any questions. And then above that is another white square. That's a lure that we use. I don't know the chemical, I can't remember. USDA suggests attaching that to the tree of heaven. And if the spotted lanternfly are out there, they should be more attracted. And so when we take the band down, we cover it with like a saran wrap because they're really hard to deal with. And they need to come back to our headquarters. We have a entomologist there who looks at all the bands, and she's looking for all the life stages. They're not the easiest traps to deal with because they are so sticky. Sort of like, I don't know if you ever dealt with the emerald ash borer traps, same kind of thing, very sticky. So what is our plan? And this changes daily, and I will tell you right now, we don't have a plan because the federal government is shut down and we don't have any funds. So assuming they open up and we get some funds, the plan will move forward. We're gonna do a 1/4 mile survey around that positive site, and we've been working on that. We know where the ailanthus are. We've done a visual, but we'll go back out when the instars and the adults, the juveniles and adults are out. We're gonna stick to those counties in close proximity to Pennsylvania and Virginia. We'll look at pathway sites. So originally when it came into Pennsylvania, they believe it came in on stone, like patio stone from China. Probably the same color as the egg mash. You probably would have never seen it. It was probably there a couple of years. It was at a stone yard, they think is where it showed up. The pest probably emerged. It was there a couple of years. Nobody ever noticed it. So we'll look at some of that. We'll look at pathways, what's coming into the state from Asia, what kind of products it are, and we'll maybe put some traps out to some of those areas. Sticking to the ailanthus and the sticky bands. And then the I-81 corridor, we'll look at that, just because it moves up and down from that Northern Virginia positive site. So we'll put traps out there. We have lots of outreach, which I've handed out some, and I have a whole nother box of stuff, so please do not leave without taking all this stuff that I brought. We have lots of swag. That happens when we get some funds from the federal government. We're able to get some swag, so we got lots of good stuff. We've done media blitzes. We've gone on Facebook, Twitter. We've done interviews for newspapers, TV, presentations. Our staff is very busy this winter out talking to everybody that we can find about spotted lanternfly. We really need the word to get out. If you see anything, please to let us know. Quarantine. So we don't have a quarantine right now. We will talk about that after our survey season this year. It's hard to put in a quarantine when we don't really know what we've got. So that is possible for the future, but not right now. So presently there's a quarantine. I was going to show you some maps. I'll get to it. It depends. It'll be restriction on movement. Some states have a permit process for businesses moving in and out. It'll affect our nursery industry, moving any type of wood product outside of it. Homeowners, we'll ask, I'll show you a checklist we have to check. And it'll depend on how big, what the infestation is, where is it, if there'll be multiple counties, one county, half a county. I mean, we have one quarantine in the state for a different pest, and it's just a tiny little corner of a county because it doesn't move much. So it will depend. So here's just some outreach, and I think you've gotten some of those wanted posters. Those, the bug off my wine and hop off my hops, are coasters, and I brought some, and we hand those out to the wineries and the breweries. And they seem to love it. So we've started up in that northeast corner. We're working throughout the state, and they're handing it out to any of the guests that come in. They're using them, so we're just trying to get that word out there. This is our homeowner checklist, and we have this on the website. So other states that have quarantines are using this, so we've got it up there and we're ready to go. So we're especially asking homeowners sort of in that area where we think we might find it, that northeast corner of the state. If you're leaving that area, just look at all those things. Take a checklist. They're asking people to sign and date it. Just put it in the car. That's probably something we'll require more if we put it in a quarantine, but it is available for people to see. Sort of the things, and I mean, it has everything on it. I mean, anything you could possibly move, it's on the list. Because they will lay their eggs, like I said, on anything. So where is the spotted lanternfly? So right now, New York and Connecticut have found dead spotted lanternfly, but they do not have any populations. Pennsylvania and New Jersey have populations, and they also have quarantines. Delaware has a population in Newcastle County, and they will likely be issuing a quarantine this spring. It's going through their legislature now. Virginia has their population in Winchester. They do not have a quarantine. And I'm not sure if they will be putting one in. Yeah.
Would Maryland quarantine require legislative action like Delaware?
No. Usually our secretary, if he approves it, it will go through. I think it gets approved essentially in the end by the governor, but generally if we approve it.
When you say they have a population, a quantity that we need?
I don't, so they determine that. So for me, a population is, if I've got live adults flying around a tree, I've got something going on, and I've probably got a population. New Jersey and Pennsylvania have huge populations. I mean, just adults swarming everywhere. So we have what I would call a very small population in the northeast corner of Cecil County, in 2 sites. We've been out, we've found a few egg masses, and we've scraped as many as we could get. And that's where we'll be spending a lot of time come this spring and summer. So here are the counties that are positive. So the blue is New Jersey, the reddish orange is Pennsylvania, purple is Delaware, we're yellow, and then that green is Virginia. And so we're really close to that Virginia line. You've got a little West Virginia in between us. They're looking as well. And then we have Washington County. And that I-81 corridor, which a lot of truckers ride up and down, it runs right through there. It certainly would not be hard for an adult to latch onto a vehicle and then fly off when it hits Washington County. It'd be very easy. So I just put a list of the counties, if anybody knows of them. These are the counties that are quarantined in Pennsylvania and in New Jersey.
Are they on the
So-
website as well?
I don't know if that's listed. It's on their website. Certainly if you go to the Pennsylvania
Okay.
Department of Ag or New Jersey Department of Ag, there absolutely will be listed. So it's the Philly area, Berks County, headed towards Lancaster. So it sort of starts in that north or southeast corner and it just sort of spreads a bit. 13 counties. New Jersey, there are 3 presently, and those are those 3 counties that sort of run right along that Pennsylvania line. So it makes sense. That's sort of where it should be. So
There's Amish markets that bring food down from there?
Yeah.
So are they gonna have to stop bringing food down?
no, they can bring food. They have quarantines. They should have a permit. We're going to talk about permits coming up. So these are your quarantined counties. And as you can see, New Jersey, it butts right up against those positive Pennsylvania counties. It's just flies right over the river, and there it is. I mean, people travel back and forth all the time, all the time. So these are the counties that you got to have a permit. Sure.
What does a deep freeze in the winter do to the population?
Kills-
Are they hardy?
Kills all the adults. It does not kill the eggs. So the likelihood is that the adults have already laid all their eggs. The eggs are going to overwinter, and then they'll emerge in the spring.
Thank you.
Sure. So any businesses in these counties are required to have a permit. Pennsylvania developed this system a couple of years ago. New Jersey sort of latched onto it, thought it was a good idea. Delaware is likely going to do so as well. And if we were to go into quarantine, we probably would require the same thing. So it's any business. It's not a private citizen. If they're moving within or through that quarantine, you're required to have a permit. That also includes any business anywhere in the country or Canada that would be driving through. So we have lots of businesses in Maryland that have been permitted because they drive right through that area.
So what does it take to get a permit?
So it's pretty easy. So it's a train the trainer course. It's through Penn State Extension. And I would suggest everyone taking that course, at the end, they're going to ask you, it's free, doesn't cost you anything. They're going to ask you how many permits you want. Just put 0. You don't need a permit, but it's a really good train the trainer course. There's lots of information. Now, it is sort of specific to Pennsylvania, some of the questions they're going to ask, but the biology part, it's all the same. So we have businesses throughout Maryland that have been permitted, Delaware, New Jersey. If you're traveling through that quarantine, you've got to have a permit, even if you're just driving through. You're not stopping, and you're going right through. It's hard. I'm going to show you some numbers. You'd be very surprised at the amount of people that have grabbed on and are permitted. Lots of people are doing this. So,
I have a question.
Yeah.
Having a permit, what does it require them to do other than get that information?
so that's what it requires them to do, and it'll tell them, like, before you leave, look at your truck. Shut your windows. Make sure you don't have any adults. Look for egg masses. So that's what they're telling them to do, especially if they're stopping. Before you leave the quarantine, look for this, look for that. So when you go through that training session, those are some of the things that you're going to want to be looking for.
But
And
there's
that's
the company to get the permit, but how does, the driver might not necessarily connect with the company.
the company's required to do that training.
And if
They're
they find
required.
it, what are they supposed to do? Just leave their truck there?
No. If they find it, then kill it. If they're leaving, if they're especially if they're in a site that's outside of that quarantine, let us know. They're going to see them. If they're in that quarantine and they're driving through in the heat of the summer, they're going to see adults. There's absolutely no way they're not. They need to do their best to make sure they don't take any of those adults outside of that quarantine.
So how
I understand, but that's what Pennsylvania Department of Ag, they don't have the resources to go out and check every truck that's moving around this quarantine. So they are hoping that businesses, people living, working in this quarantine are going to do their part to slow the spread. So that's what they're asking. The enforcement on this law will start May 1st. So right now they haven't been pushing enforcement. It is in their statute, but they haven't pushed it because it is new and they're trying to get that information out to those businesses. You have up to a criminal fine of $300. You could have a civil penalty up to $20,000. They could take your permit. I expect that there is going to be some enforcement happening after May 1st. They're pretty serious about this. So as you can see, they've issued over 83,000 permits. That does not mean 83,000 people took the test, but they've issued 83,000 permits. Walmart has taken the test and received permits.
For the businesses.
So that's the Department of Ag, and they are supposedly out there telling these businesses in their quarantines that they need these permits. We're letting our people know, so I work with the nursery industry. We regulate the nursery industry. We have let all of our nursery industry, the entire licensed group within the state, we've sent out notices. If you're moving in there, you better get your permit. It doesn't take a lot of work, but you need to have it. So they've been pretty open to getting that. It's word of mouth. It's when you talk to people, letting them know that this is where they're headed.
The expense of a permit,
It's free.
free.
Time. Takes a little time. You have to go online, you have to take the test. But it doesn't cost you anything.
How long is the test?
I have not taken it. Some of my staff have. I wouldn't say more than like a half hour.
Okay.
So are we going to get into public service announcements as we get closer to spring?
Well, I don't know. Certainly Pennsylvania will. I can't enforce their law. So if you break that permit, oh, sure, we're going to be out there talking about it. Yeah, we were out there last year. We'll be out there this year. Facebook, Twitter, picking it up as we find it and make more decisions, certainly. Oh, so if they wanted to know the website, if you just Google spotted lanternfly permit Penn State, right at the top. You're not going to miss it. It's going to be the first thing that comes up. So the Department of Agriculture also has the permitting program, but they are asking that you go through Penn State. Penn State has set up, their extension has set up this whole permitting system. Once you've passed, and if you've requested a permit or multiple permits, that information goes to the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture. They issue the permit because they have the law and the quarantine and the enforcement behind them. So that's how that works. So we are asking, if you know businesses in Pennsylvania in that quarantine area, let them know, and they're moving, let them know they need a permit. So they've done a lot of work getting it out there. They've trained over 4,700 people, 2,800 people have tested. The number of companies, so here's where you're going to see that number change. So 1,448 companies have permitting. They've issued over 83,000 permits. So those companies are asking for multiple permits. Many, 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 many permits, and they're willing to do that. They keep track of all that information. The permits have a number, and that's how they keep track. So it is a train the trainer course. So the person taking that test is going to be required to go back to their business and train those people that they deem need the training. So that's how this works. Because there is absolutely no way the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, the Maryland Department of Agriculture could go out and train all these people. We just don't have the staff or resources. So they have found that this works really, really well.
So does the permit number have the license number of the vehicle?
No, it's just a strict permit number. So if somebody sees something and they can pull that permit number, PDA will know who that's associated with. So that's what I have. So I will take any more questions that you have. I have lots of free stuff that I brought other than what I've already given, so please take lots of goodies.
And notice you've shown the fly. When do they really morph into the fly?
To the adults, so starting July is when you're going to start to see the adults. They will be around until we have that first hard freeze. I mean, you'll get some frost and they aren't going to die. You really need that hard freeze before they, I mean, in Pennsylvania, they've found dead adults sitting on vines, like grapevines. They're dead, but they were there when that hard freeze came through and they just died right there. So those are those high pop, yes.
So has anyone given consideration to destroying or reducing the population of Tree of Heaven as an approach?
Good question. I should have talked about that. So we wanted to know about destroying Tree of Heaven. So part of what the survey is that we do with USDA would be some treatment work. So what they do, some things they'll use trap trees. So they'll go out and treat with an insecticide, a systemic insecticide, Tree of Heaven. And so what they hope with that is that the adults will feed, or even the nymphs will feed on it, and they will die, because they've ingested that insecticide. They are also removing Tree of Heaven, but when you remove a Tree of Heaven, you have got to use an herbicide to kill it because it will sprout out all over the place. So they're doing that. The one thing USDA isn't doing when they decide to kill a Tree of Heaven with an herbicide is to remove it. So they're leaving them standing dead. So they have to be pretty careful about where they're doing that. You don't want to do that on the side of a road, because if it falls over and it falls in the road, that's not a good idea. So we will be working with USDA. They will be doing the treatment end of it. We'll be doing the survey end of it. So once we find it, we do our full-on survey. We know where all the Tree of Heaven is. That information goes back to USDA. Our folks in Baltimore, and they'll be coming out, they'll have contracts. So Pennsylvania has a contract with, I believe, a couple large companies. New Jersey does the same. And the companies are required to go out and treat these ailanthus. and that's what they do. And they'll make a determination if they want to treat it with an insecticide or herbicide. Possible. Like, would they change hosts? Will they need a different host to find for the reproduction? Certainly. Insects are very good at that. They're looking at that kind of thing in the lab. They haven't seen it out in the field because Tree of Heaven is everywhere, and they certainly are able to find it. So that's, sure, that could happen. Yes, ma'am.
So this is spotted lanternfly. Are there other kinds of lanternfly?
So are there other types of lanternfly? So this is a spotted lanternfly. It is a not what you would consider a fly. It's not in that family. It's a Fulguridae. There's about 3 or 4 in the country. They're mainly tropical and Asian. Not a lot of research has been done on this family. There's just not a lot of them, and they don't cause a lot of damage. So I'm not sure if there's any. I think there may be one other in this area, but I don't think it's probably a native. I don't think you'd ever notice it or think anything of it. So lots of research being done on this one. Lots and lots. Yes, ma'am. Sorry.
Several questions.
No, sure.
Number one, what size is it? Like
What size is it? It's about between 1 to 2 inches. When yeah, they're pretty big. Yeah, they aren't. They're noticeable. You're gonna see it.
If you see one or someone sees one, who should they contact?
If you see right up there, if you see what you think is a spotted lanternfly, first try to catch it and freeze it. Put it in the freezer. Don't smush it. Makes it harder for us. If you can freeze it, send an email to don'tbug.md@maryland.gov, and that's on all our outreach stuff too. You'll see that at the bottom. Okay. And then we will get right back to you. We're gonna need, right now, we need any adult that you, or any instar. Anything you find that you think is spotted lanternfly, we need those. They go through our agency, and we send those on to USDA for final confirmation. It's a pretty easy bug to ID, but they like USDA because they are the funding source. They make that final confirmation for us. So, yes?
And if I found what I thought was a population, like 5 to 7, what should I do? Should I spray it with some insecticide? What should I use?
So we don't give insecticide recommendations. She wanted to know what to use if you think you see it. So generally, any insecticide will work. They're an insect, and they aren't very hardy when they're out there. I mean, they say neem oil will work. They'll say, anything, 7. I mean, anything will kill it. Keep in mind, you don't have any neonicotinoid products. Those aren't available to the homeowners anymore. And so we'll work with Extension and are working with Extension, and they'll be putting out those recommendations. They generally do the chemical recommendations for us, and we work mainly on that survey sort of regulator end. Yes, ma'am.
I do know that Dr. Bittinger at Penn State is currently doing research on the best chemical control for them, but that's not conclusive yet.
Right. And
Which is neonicotinoids.
Of course. Penn State has a lot of really, really, really good information. If you just Google Penn State spotted lanternfly, I mean, you will find pages of information. They do have papers out on recommendations for homeowners, for peach growers, for apple growers. So I would highly recommend looking at that, keeping in mind that our laws are a little different than Pennsylvania, so what they might say is available to some may not be available here. But that's generally where we send people. We don't have a full-on population, so we're not giving those recommendations out. But grape growers need to know what they can use because this is coming, and the peach growers and the apple growers, they need to know what's available to them in our state. Yes, ma'am.
Is there any effort being made to control the spread of Tree of Heaven?
Effort being made to control the Tree of Heaven. It's sort of everywhere. I'm
just saying.
Yeah, I wouldn't say we are not making that effort. Certainly we always, if people ask about it, we say it's an invasive, and we would recommend that you destroy it and get rid of it. That's not a plant we would want you to have in your backyard. You shouldn't want to have that in your backyard. We don't do any regulations. We don't have any regulations against Tree of Heaven. It's just too widespread.
They're not good flyers. What's the range?
They really aren't good flyers. So generally what they do is they climb as high as they can, they get in some wind, and they take off. So the range could be 100 feet, it could be 300 feet. It depends on how windy of a day. I mean, we're not talking miles. Their biggest, once they get latched into a car or on somebody, that's their biggest range. So I don't know an exact scientific range, but they don't fly well at all. I mean, in Pennsylvania, they've seen them crawl to the top of like 3-story buildings, wait for that wind, launch, take off with the wind. So the windier days, the further they're gonna go. Yes, ma'am.
So I live in southern Cecil County. Could you just tell me the towns where you've spotted them?
So we are in the northeast corner, like the Fair Hill area, Rising Sun area, and very close to that PA line. Like you can touch the PA line about where we can find it.
We're an hour from that PA line, but on our property we've gotten rid of most of the tree of heaven in the 20 years we've lived there, but there are some that are right on the edge of the water that we have permission to take down, but have not been able to get down.
Right, so it would probably not be a bad idea if you can. Doesn't mean they're not gonna come to your property because you probably have lots of other hosts that they can feed on.
Of course.
But
Plus we're driving around.
yes, absolutely, yep, so yeah, certainly.
Does the instar behavior going up and down the trees also translate to vines and hops?
Does the instars, the going up and down the trees, is it the same with the vines and the hops? I don't know. I haven't seen pictures or heard evidence. I just know when they feed on mainly Tree of Heaven, their movement is up and down. I don't know. I'm not sure.
How long do the adults live?
How long do the adults live? So they start emerging July, August. They live until that first hard freeze. So that could go to December. I mean, that could be months. They're mating, they're laying eggs, they're mating, they're laying eggs. So you've got quite a large range. Depends. So sadly, we like a really good early hard freeze now.
So adults continually lay eggs?
They can lay multiple times.
So you said the egg masses are pink, so if someone, even a permitted company nursery is trying to sell like pink petunias.
They're not pink. If I said pink, I misspoke. They're gray.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misheard.
They're like a muddish gray color. So what the females do is they lay the eggs and then they sort of lay this covering, this waxy coating over top of those eggs, and that keeps them safe for the weather. That's why they do that. And they're tough to see. So, yes ma'am.
One more question.
Very good, okay? We do have a farm, we do have Tree of Heaven on it, we do have grapes. My husband is concerned.
He should be. Yeah.
In the chance, in the odd chance, because I know on 213 we have Tree of Heaven. If you cut it off at the ground, maybe paint it with something, and you burn it, is it like poison oak or poison ivy where when you burn it, you really aren't killing it, you're still it's still spreading through airborne?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't think of it as a poisonous plant. So,
Okay.
but if you're gonna cut that tree, you absolutely need to put an herbicide on that trunk that's left, because if not, you will end up with hundreds more. Absolutely, make sure you don't just cut it and let it think it's just gonna die. It's not. It's very tricky.
We're lucky in the sense that the ones I'm thinking about are saplings. So we still have that ability perhaps to cut them down. But it
Yep.
would be a lot of them.
It's a lot. I mean, one of the issues that Pennsylvania has is the railways. There's lots of railways that go through this part of Pennsylvania. Ailanthus covers those sides of railways, and it's really hard to get permission to go onto those railways. So that's a real struggle. That's, you don't think about all those things when you start working with something like this, and it's a struggle. It takes a lot of work, certainly.
So you said they've started looking at the biocontrols. I mean, that seems like it would be a real.
Right, so asking about biocontrol, USDA is looking into biocontrol. So they have a couple of labs in the country, and so they have started, they usually go like to Asia, they look for biocontrol there, they'll bring it back, they'll put it in the lab, but it takes a good 4 or 5 years. I know with emerald ash borer it took a very long time. So.
Great, thank you very much.
Sure.